Man, sit down. Lean in close. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't something I'd just share with anyone. You're my brother, and you know the road I've walked to get here. But even you don't know the full weight of what happened last Tuesday. It's funny, isn't it? People look at us, men like me, 50 years old, salt and pepper beard trimmed to the millimeter, wearing a suit that costs more than some people's first cars, and they think we've made it. They think the money and the title of CEO act like some kind of magic spell that wards off the ugliness of the world. They think that once you've climbed the mountain, the wind stops blowing so hard. But let me tell you something, man to man. Sometimes, the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets, and the more people want to see you gasp for breath. Before I dive into the grit of it, I want you to do me a favor. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt that cold chill of being judged before you even opened your mouth, drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Let's build a little community right here in the comments. Because Lord knows, we need to look out for each other. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot of truth to cover, and I don't want you missing a single word of it. Now, picture this. I was at the tail end of a 60-hour work week. My bones felt like they were made of lead. My brain was buzzing from back-to-back meetings in Manhattan, where I'd been negotiating a logistics contract that would basically keep half the shipping lanes in this country moving for the next decade. I was tired. The kind of tired that gets into your soul. I just wanted to get home to my wife, kick off my shoes, and be Marcus, not Mr. Sterling, the chief executive. Just Marcus. I was standing there in the terminal at O'Hare, waiting for my flight. I call it my armor. You know, that suit. It's a charcoal gray, custom tailored, 3-piece. When I put it on, I feel like a knight preparing for battle. It's supposed to signal power. It's supposed to say, I belong here. My briefcase is to me. Leather, slightly scuffed at the corners because I've carried it through every major city from London to Tokyo. That briefcase has held documents that shifted markets. But standing there, leaning against a pillar, I felt that familiar weight. Not the weight of the briefcase, but the weight of the eyes. You know, the gaze. Right. It's not a stare. A stare is direct. The gaze is sideways. It's the way the woman sitting 3 seats down clutches her purse a little tighter when I check my watch. It's the way the security guard's eyes follow me just a fraction of a second longer than they follow the white guy in the khakis next to me. It's a low-frequency hum of suspicion that's been the soundtrack to my entire life. No matter how many zeros are in my bank account, that hum never quite goes away. I stood there, watching the rain smear against the massive glass windows of the terminal, feeling like an intruder in a world I literally helped build. I think about my father a lot in those moments. He was a postman in Georgia. He used to tell me, Marcus, you have to walk twice as fast and shine twice as bright just to be seen as equal. And even then, some people will only see the shadow you cast. I used to think he was being cynical. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I got the degrees, if I reached the C-suite, I'd finally be able to just be. But standing in that airport, smelling the burnt coffee and the jet fuel, I realized the armor only protects you from the outside. It doesn't do a damn thing for the heart inside. The boarding call came over the speakers. Group 1, First Class and Diamond Medallion members. Please begin boarding. I picked up my briefcase. I straightened my silk tie. I took a deep breath. Trying to shake off the exhaustion, I walked toward the priority lane. There was a line starting to form. A younger guy, maybe in his 30s, wearing a tech vest and AirPods, stepped right in front of me. He didn't even look. He just assumed I wasn't part of the Group 1 crowd. I didn't say anything. I just stood behind him. Then came a woman behind me, dressed in expensive athleisure wear. She tapped me on the shoulder. Not a friendly tap, but a "you're in my way" poke, huh? "Excuse me," she said, her voice thin and sharp. "This is the line for first class. Economy is back there by the Group 4 sign." I turned slowly. I didn't lose my cool. I've learned that losing your cool is exactly what they want. It justifies the narrative they've already written about you in their heads. I just gave her a small, tight smile. "I'm aware," I said. My voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice that commands a boardroom. "I'm in the right place." She scoffed. She actually scoffed. "Man." She looked at the tech vest guy, and they shared this look. This tiny, microsecond bond of "can you believe this guy?" I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't anger yet. It was just that old, familiar ache, the "here we go again" feeling. When I got to the gate agent, I handed over my digital boarding pass on my phone. The agent, a middle-aged man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, scanned it. The machine gave that high-pitched ding that signifies a diamond member. He looked at the screen, then looked at me. He didn't say, "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling." He didn't even use my name. He just grunted and signaled me through. I walked down that long, slanted jetway, that liminal space between the earth and the sky, and I tried to let the negativity go. "Just get to your seat, Marcus," I told myself. "Get to 2A, order a drink, and disappear for 4 hours." But the air in the jetway felt heavy. It's a strange thing. Mon, you'd think that after all these years, I'd be used to it. I've sat at tables with senators. I've had my face on the cover of business magazines. But every time I step into a space that's traditionally exclusive, I feel like I'm breaking a law just by breathing. I stepped through the door of the plane. You know that blast of cold. Recycled air that hits you when you walk on. It usually feels refreshing. But this time, it felt clinical. Steadily, I was met by the lead flight attendant standing at the galley. She was a blonde woman, maybe in her late 30s, with a smile that looked like it had been painted on her face and then left to dry in the sun too long. Her name tag said Tiffany. She was greeting the tech vest guy with a chirpy, "Welcome aboard, sir." Then, it was my turn. I stepped up, my briefcase in hand, my posture straight. I looked her in the eye and gave her a polite nod. "Good evening," I said. The smile vanished. She looked Tiffany straight in the eyes, my hand still gripping the handle of my bag. I could feel the heat radiating from her fingertips through the expensive wool of my jacket. And for a second, the world just went silent. You know that silence, right? It's not a peaceful one. It's the kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks, or right after a car crash. It's the sound of everyone in the room holding their breath, waiting to see if the tension is going to snap. I looked down at her hand, white knuckles, manicured nails, and then I looked back at her eyes. She wasn't just doing her job. She was defending a territory. In her mind, this cabin was a sanctuary, and I was the smudge on the glass. I slowly pulled my arm back, not with a jerk, but with a steady, deliberate motion that forced her to let go. I didn't say a word. I just held her gaze. I've stared down board members who were trying to hostile take over my life's work. So a flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder wasn't going to make me blink. But it hurt. It always hurts. You'd think the skin would get thicker over time, like a callus, but it's the opposite. The more you achieve, the more you realize how little it matters to people who have already decided who you are based on the color of your skin. The bag stays, I said. My voice was like a low hum of a cello, deep, vibrating, and absolutely immovable. Tiffany's lip curled. Just a fraction. It was a sneer she thought she was hiding behind a professional mask. Sir, I'm going to need to see your physical boarding pass. Again. And your ID. You already saw the digital pass at the door. I reminded her, and the gate agent scanned it. Well, she said, her voice rising just enough so the man in 1B and the woman in 3B could hear every word. There have been some issues with fraudulent apps lately. People trying to bypass the system. I'm sure you understand. We have to maintain the integrity of the first-class cabin for our preferred guests. There it was. The word preferred. It's one of those coded words they use to build a wall without actually laying any bricks. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out my wallet. I took out my driver's license and my printed backup boarding pass. I didn't hand them to her. I held them up, making her reach for them. She snatched them out of my hand like they were contaminated. She didn't just look at them. She studied them. She held my ID up to the light, checking the holograms, looking back and forth between the plastic card and my face. It was a performance. She was putting me on trial in front of a jury of strangers. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the eyes of the other passengers boring into the side of my head. Marcus Sterling. She read aloud, her voice dripping with skepticism. She looked at the ticket. And your aseo. That's what it says, I replied. She let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a dry twig snapping. Business must be real good for everyone these days. I didn't know the logistics industry paid well enough for this kind of travel. She handed the documents back, but she didn't just hand them. She let them drop onto the small cocktail table between the seats. Wait here. I need to verify this with the ground crew. She turned on her heel and marched toward the front galley. I watched her go, and for a moment, I felt like that 18-year-old kid again, standing on a street corner in Atlanta, wondering why the police cruiser was slowing down just for me. You can build a kingdom, brother, but you're still living in a world that thinks you're just trespassing. I leaned my head back against the leather headrest. It was soft, expensive, the kind of comfort I had earned through decades of sweat and sleepless nights. But right then, it felt like sitting on a bed of nails. I felt a sharp, familiar pung in my chest, not a heart attack, but the physical manifestation of high-octane stress. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. My blood pressure meds. My doctor had told me, Marcus, you've got to find a way to let the world slide off your back, or your heart is going to give out before your career does. My throat was dry, parched, actually, the kind of thirst that makes it hard to swallow. I looked at the bottle, then looked toward the galley. Tiffany was standing there, whispering into the phone, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. She wasn't verifying my ticket. She was gossiping. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The plane was fully boarded now. Tiffany finally hung up the phone. She didn't come to me. Instead, she started her pre-flight service. She grabbed a tray of pre-poured champagne and orange juice. She went to 1B first. Then she skipped me entirely. She walked right past 2A and went to the back. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me?" I said. "Miss." She turned around, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. "Yes. Is there a problem now? I'd just like a glass of water." "Please," I said. "I need to take my medication. We're in the middle of pre-flight checks." "Sir, I'm very busy. You'll have to wait until we reach 10,000 feet." I've watched you serve everyone else in this cabin, I said, my voice remaining calm. It would take you 30 seconds to pour a glass of water. She leaned in, her face just inches from mine. Listen, she whispered, her voice low and sharp. I don't know who you think you are, or what kind of CEO game you're playing. But on this plane, I am the one in charge. You're lucky I'm even letting you stay in this seat after that little display at the door. You can wait for your water, like everybody else. Or, if you're really that thirsty, there's a fountain in the terminal. You're more than welcome to go back there and stay there. She pulled back and walked away. I sat there, the orange bottle clutched in my hand. Feeling the humiliation, I looked at the passengers around me. Mr. Henderson was staring at his laptop. The woman in 3B was looking out the window. Everyone pretends it's invisible. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to find my center. I thought about the warehouse where I started my company. I thought about the nights I slept on a cold, concrete floor. I had fought too hard to let a woman like Tiffany break me. But as the minutes ticked by, and the thirst grew, I felt a shift. The CEO in me started to wake up. Not the man who wanted to be liked, but the man who knew how to analyze a system and identify the point of failure. This airline was the system. Tiffany was the point of failure. Tiffany came back through the cabin one last time. She stopped at mine, ostentatiously checking the latch on my Toomey bag. Last chance to move to economy. Sir, it's going to be a very long flight if you're already this sensitive. She didn't wait for an answer. She went to the front and started the safety briefing. Her voice was back to that chirpy, artificial airline voice. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone the truth. Instead, I sat perfectly still. I felt the vibration of the engine starting up. We were moving. The plane began to push back. I reached down into my briefcase. My hands were steady now. The tremor of anger had been replaced by the cold, hard precision of a man who was done being a victim. I pulled out my laptop, a sleek, high-end machine. I opened the lid. The glow of the screen reflected in my eyes. I looked at the first-class cabin one more time. I looked at Tiffany, who was now sitting in her jump seat, checking her phone. She thought she had won. She had no idea that she had just walked into a boardroom she didn't belong in. I felt the plane bank slightly as we began our taxi toward the runway. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed. I didn't fasten my seatbelt yet. My fingers were hovering over the keyboard. I began to type. The click-clack of the keys was the only sound I could hear over the hum of the jet engines. I wasn't writing a complaint letter. I was writing a directive. I could see the runway lights flashing past the window now. We were picking up speed. I was leaning forward. I was focused on the cursor blinking on the screen, a tiny heartbeat of digital intent. I looked out the window one last time as the nose of the plane lifted off the ground. As the wheels left the tarmac, I hit the connect button for the high-speed satellite Wi-Fi. The signal bars climbed. 1, 2, full strength. I looked at the draft of the email I had just composed. It was addressed to the Board of Directors of Sterling Global Logistics, with a CC to the Executive Vice President of Operations for this very airline. I had known him for 10 years. I wondered what he would call me when he saw what I was about to do. I felt the plane level off as we climbed through the first layer of clouds. The 10,000 feet chime rang through the cabin, the signal that Tiffany said I had to wait for. She stood up and started toward the galley. My finger hovered over the send button. I hit the key. The sending status bar appeared. I watched it with a grim sort of satisfaction. I wasn't the angry black man Tiffany wanted me to be. I was the CEO she should have feared. I closed the laptop with a soft thud. I sat there, watching the seconds tick by on my watch. 10 minutes. 12 minutes. The flight deck door opened. The lead pilot stepped out. He looked frantic. He whispered something to Tiffany as he passed. I saw her face change. The customer service mask shattered. She turned around, her eyes wide, and looked directly at me. I just stared back, my face a mask of cold, unyielding stone. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just waited. The pilot was walking toward me now. He stopped at seat 2A. "Mr. Sterling?" he asked. I slowly reached out and picked up the orange bottle of medication, turning it over in my hand. "I'm still waiting for that water," I said. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. The pilot looked at Tiffany, whose face had gone a ghostly shade of gray. "Mr. Sterling, we just received an emergency communication from our corporate headquarters. There seems to be a massive misunderstanding regarding our partnership contracts. Is that so?" I asked. I reached out and flicked the fasten seatbelt sign on my own overhead console. I could hear the sound of someone sobbing in the galley. I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my suit, and reached for my briefcase. I was the only one standing. The pilot was at my side. "Mr. Sterling, please, we can fix this." I looked at him. Then at the door of the plane, "You should have started with the water," I said. I walked toward the exit, my briefcase in hand, my head held high. I didn't look back at Tiffany. I didn't look back at the passengers. I just walked out into the cool, damp air of the night, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet for the first time in hours. The world was waiting. I took a deep breath and started to walk. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was vibrating with a dozen notifications. I didn't answer any of them. I just turned the phone off. I was Marcus Sterling. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to prove it to anyone. I kept walking. The end of the road was just the beginning of a new one. I felt the car slow down as we turned into my driveway. We were here. I walked toward the front door. I didn't hesitate. I just reached out and turned the handle. I was home, and that was all that mattered. "Marcus," a voice called. "I'm here," I said. I reached the kitchen and saw my wife. "How was the flight?" she asked. "It was a long one," I said, "but I'm glad to be back." I took a sip of the water she'd already poured. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I closed my eyes and let the peace of the house settle over me. I was home, and I was free. I was just getting started. I reached the top of the stairs and looked back one last time. I was home, and the world was finally at peace. At least for tonight. I lay down in bed. I was Marcus Sterling, and I was finally at rest. The silence was perfect. The end. The pilot, a man whose face was mapped with the lines of 10,000 flight hours, stood there in the narrow aisle of first class, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. He wasn't looking at me like I was a passenger anymore. He was looking at me like I was a ticking time bomb that had already reached zero. Behind him, Tiffany was a statue of frozen arrogance, her hand still hovering near the beverage cart, as if she could somehow wish herself into another dimension. The hum of the engines, that constant, low-frequency vibration that usually lulls you into a stupor, suddenly felt like a roar of accountability. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, my fingers resting lightly on the lid of my laptop. I could feel the electricity of the high-speed Wi-Fi connection still pulsing through the machine, a silent messenger that had just delivered a death blow to the airline's quarterly projections. You see, when you're in my position, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to throw a tantrum or demand to speak to a manager. You just need to speak the language of the machine. And the machine speaks in contracts, logistics, and bottom lines. The pilot, Captain Miller, according to the wings on his chest, swallowed hard. I could see the pulse in his neck jumping. "Mr. Sterling," he began, his voice dropping into a register that was meant only for my ears. Though every passenger in the first 3 rows was leaning in so far, they were practically out of their seats. I've just stepped off the radio with our VP of Operations in Dallas. And, well, I've also been informed that our CEO is trying to reach you directly on your personal line. I leaned back, the leather of the seat creaking softly under my weight. I felt a strange, cold clarity. The dry itch in my throat from the lack of water was still there, but it didn't bother me anymore. It served as a reminder of why I was doing this. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice as smooth as a polished stone. "I'm surprised. I thought your team was far too busy with pre-flight checks to handle minor things like multi-billion-dollar logistics partnerships." I glanced over at Tiffany. Her eyes were darting back and forth between the captain and me, her face pale, the skin around her mouth tight with a growing, sickening realization. She had treated me like a nuisance. She had treated me like an intruder in a space she felt she owned. But now, she was watching her commander-in-chief bow to the very man she had tried to humiliate. "There's been a grave misunderstanding, sir," Captain Miller said, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "A massive failure in protocol. We've been instructed to do whatever is necessary to rectify the situation immediately. Whatever you need, Mr. Sterling." Truly, I looked at the orange pill bottle sitting on my tray table. It looked so small, so insignificant. But that little plastic bottle represented the one thing Tiffany had refused to give me. Basic human dignity. What I needed was a glass of water. "Captain," I said, not moving my eyes from his. 10 minutes ago, before I had to use the satellite link to tell my board that our cultural alignment with this carrier had officially dissolved. Before I instructed my legal team to trigger the force majeure exit clause based on the hostile environment created by your staff. The word billions didn't need to be said. It was hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Sterling Global Logistics doesn't just move boxes. Man, we move the lifeblood of the industry. We handle the fuel contracts, the regional parts distribution, and the heavy lift cargo that keeps these planes in the air. If I pulled the plug, this airline wouldn't just lose money. They would lose their ability to operate in 3 major hubs by Monday morning. I knew it. The captain knew it. And somewhere in a glass tower in Dallas, a group of executives were currently watching their stock price take a nosedive as the news of the contractual reevaluation hit the wires. "Please," Miller whispered. "Tiffany, get the gentleman his water. Now." Tiffany moved. She didn't walk. She scrambled. It was a frantic, desperate movement, the sound of her heels clicking on the floor like a panicked heartbeat. She grabbed a crystal glass, not the plastic ones they usually use for water, but the fine glassware reserved for the vintage scotch. She filled it so quickly the water splashed over the rim, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the tray. She brought it to me. She leaned over, her face just inches from mine, and I could see the terror in her eyes. It was a raw, naked fear, the fear of a person who realized they had just pushed the wrong button on a very large machine. "Here you go, sir," she stammered, her voice thin and cracking. I am so incredibly sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't take the glass. I just looked at it. You didn't realize what? Tiffany, that I was preferred enough, that my suit was expensive enough, Or were you just surprised that the man in 2A could fight back without raising his voice? She didn't have an answer. She just stood there holding the glass, her hands trembling, while the water dripped onto the silk carpet. The captain stayed where he was, standing guard like a sentry at a funeral. "Mr. Sterling, the CEO is on standby. He wants to apologize personally. He's prepared to terminate the staff involved immediately." I felt the weight of that offer. They were willing to sacrifice Tiffany on the altar of their bottom line to keep me from walking away. And for a second, a dark part of me wanted to see it. I wanted to see her walk off that plane in handcuffs, or watch her career vanish in the time it took to land. But that's the thing about power. Men, if you use it the same way they use their prejudice, you aren't any better than they are. I looked around the cabin. Mr. Henderson in first base was staring at me now, his laptop forgotten. The woman in 3B was looking at me with a mixture of shame and awe. They had watched the whole thing. They had seen the disrespect, and they had seen the pivot. They were seeing a black man in a suit take control of a multi-billion-dollar narrative without ever losing his cool. I finally reached out and took the glass from Tiffany's shaking hand. The water was cold, the condensation slick against my palm. I didn't drink it right away. I held it up to the light, watching the way the cabin lights refracted through the crystal. "You know, Captain," I said, my voice carried across the quiet cabin. "When I was coming up in this business, I used to think that the goal was to get to a place where people had to respect me because of my title. I thought the CEO on the door would be my shield. But today reminded me that people like Tiffany don't see the title. They don't see the suit. They see the man they've been taught to fear or look down upon." I took a slow, deliberate sip of the water. It was just water, but it tasted like victory. "Mr. Sterling, please," the captain urged. "The contract. Can we talk about the contract? If we can just get a statement saying you're open to mediation, we can stop the hemorrhaging. The markets are reacting aggressively." I looked at the captain. He was just a man doing his job, trying to save his company from a disaster he didn't create. But he was part of the system that allowed Tiffany to thrive. He was part of the silence that made people like me feel like ghosts in our own lives. "The markets are reacting to the truth," I said. "And the truth is that Sterling Global Logistics doesn't partner with companies that treat human beings like cargo. You have 15 minutes before my board makes the termination of the partnership official and permanent. 15 minutes to show me that this isn't just about saving your stock price, but about changing your soul." I set the glass down on the tray table with a sharp clack. "Tiffany," I said, turning my gaze to her. She flinched as if I'd struck her. "Go back to the galley. I don't want to see you for the rest of this flight. Captain, tell your CEO that I'll take his call in 15 minutes, not a second sooner. And tell him that if he wants to save this deal, he'd better start thinking about more than just an apology." Tiffany turned and fled, her head down, her pride left somewhere on the floor of the first-class cabin. The captain nodded, a look of grim determination on his face, and retreated toward the cockpit. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of a vacuum. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen when the air rushed back in. I sat there, the blue light of the laptop still illuminating my face, watching the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 14:59. 14:58. The countdown had begun. I looked out the window. We were high above the clouds now, the sun setting in a brilliant, angry streak of orange and purple across the horizon. It was beautiful, but it was a cold beauty. Down there, in the world of offices and warehouses and stock tickers, People were scrambling. They were making phone calls. They were shouting. They were trying to figure out how one man in Seat 2A had managed to bring a giant to its knees. But up here, it was just me, Marcus, a man who just wanted a glass of water and a little bit of peace. I felt the plane bank again, a slow, wide turn that felt like the earth itself was shifting. I knew the captain was probably talking to the EVP of operations, trying to find a way to make me whole. But they didn't get it. You can't make a man whole with a flight credit or a public relations statement. You can only make a man whole by seeing him. I reached out and picked up my phone. It was buzzing in my pocket, a relentless vibration that felt like a trapped bird. I looked at the screen. Caller ID. Chief Executive Officer, airline name. I let it ring. I looked at the woman in 3B. She caught my eye and quickly looked away, her face flushing. She had been part of the Group 1 crowd that thought I was in the wrong line. Now, she was sitting in the shadow of my influence, and she didn't know how to handle the weight of it. Is everything okay? Sir, she whispered, her voice trembling. I gave her a small, sad smile. Everything is exactly how it's supposed to be, I said. I turned back to my laptop. I had work to do. Not the kind of work that involves spreadsheets or logistics, but the kind of work that involves setting a new standard. I began to type a new email, not to my board, but to my legal team. I wanted to draft a new set of requirements for all our partners. A human dignity clause. If they wanted Sterling Global's power, they were going to have to earn it by respecting Sterling Global's people. The minutes ticked by. 10:00:09. 59. The flight deck door opened again. This time, it wasn't just the captain. It was the co-pilot. Two. They both stood there, looking at me with a level of deference that was almost uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, the captain said, we've just received a direct order. We are being diverted to a private terminal at the nearest hub. The CEO is flying in on a private jet to meet you on the ground. He wants to talk face to face. He says the future of the airline depends on it. I looked at the clock. 05:00. Tell him I'll be there, I said. But tell him to bring his own water. I've had enough of yours. The co-pilot let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh that he quickly choked back. They both retreated, and I felt the plane begin a steep, rapid descent. The engines whined as the pilots pulled back on the power, the nose of the aircraft dipping toward the thick blanket of clouds below. I looked at the glass of water on my tray. It was half empty now. I picked it up and finished it in one long, cold gulp. I felt the liquid settle in my stomach, a physical anchor in a world that was spinning out of control. We were dropping fast. The turbulence increased as we hit the weather, the plane shaking and shuddering like a living thing. I saw the tech vest guy in 1B white-knuckling his armrests, his face pale with a different kind of fear. He was worried about the landing. I was worried about the world we were going to find when we got there. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my Toomey briefcase. I zipped it up with a slow, deliberate motion. I straightened my tie, smoothed the wool of my jacket, and checked my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a man who was ready to negotiate the terms of a new reality. The clouds broke, and the lights of the city below rushed up to meet us. They looked like a sea of diamonds scattered across a black velvet cloth. It was a beautiful sight, but all I could see were the logistics, the threads that I held in my hands. The landing gear dropped with a heavy, mechanical thud. The plane felt different now, heavier, more grounded. We weren't just a flight anymore. We were a diplomatic mission. I looked toward the galley. I could see the edge of Tiffany's skirt. She was sitting in her jump seat, her head in her hands. She was waiting for the end of the world. And in a way, she was right. Her world, the one where she could treat a man like me with casual, sarcastic disdain and get away with it, was over. The plane hit the tarmac with a jolt that rattled the overhead bins. The reverse thrusters roared. We were slowing down. We were turning off the main runway, moving toward a secluded, high-security area reserved for private hangars. I saw the black SUVs lined up on the tarmac. I saw the men in suits standing in the rain. In the center of them stood a man I recognized from a dozen business summits. The CEO of the airline. He looked small and frail under the harsh glare of the hangar lights. The plane came to a complete stop. The cabin door began to hum as the seal was broken. I could feel the change in pressure, the sudden rush of cold, damp air from the outside world. It felt real. It felt raw. I stood up. I reached into the overhead bin and pulled out my briefcase. I turned to look at the cabin one last time. "I hope you all enjoyed the flight," I said, my voice quiet, but echoing in the absolute silence. I walked toward the door. As I passed the galley, I saw Tiffany. I stepped onto the air stairs. The rain hit my face, cold and stinging, and I took a deep breath of the kerosene-scented air. I reached the bottom step and stopped, my hand still gripping the railing, my eyes fixed on the man waiting for me in the dark. I didn't reach out to shake his hand. I just stood there, letting the rain soak into my $5,000 suit, feeling the solid, unyielding earth beneath my feet. The 15 minutes were up. I tightened my grip on my briefcase, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs, and I took the first step forward into the rain, my eyes never leaving his. The rain wasn't just falling, it was reclaiming the earth, washing away the heat of the engines and the artificial hum of the cabin I'd just escaped. I stood there on the bottom step of those metal stairs, the wind whipping the tails of my overcoat, watching the CEO of one of the world's largest airlines, a man named Harrison, whom I'd shared expensive bourbon with in Aspen, standing there like a drenched schoolboy. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't have his usual entourage of PR flacks and legal eagles. He just had the look of a man who had watched $10 billion of market cap evaporate into the Chicago mist in the time it took to fly from Lake Michigan to this private strip. "You still with me, brother?" Good. Because this is where the ink hits the page. This is where the world finds out if you're a man of your word, or just a man with a bank account. I didn't move. I didn't reach for his hand. I let the silence stretch out, punctuated only by the rhythmic plink-plink of the rain hitting my briefcase. Behind me, the massive jet sat like a grounded whale. And up there, in that little window in the galley, I knew Tiffany was watching. I knew she was seeing the man she had called sensitive and lucky being treated like a king by the man who signed her paychecks. But I wasn't looking for her. I was looking through Harrison. "Marcus," he said, his voice struggling to compete with the wind. "Jesus, Marcus, what are we doing here?" My phone has been ringing off the hook for 20 minutes. The board is in a full-blown panic. The wire services are reporting a total operational divorce between Sterling Global and US. Our stock is in freefall. People are calling it the Sterling Blackout. Well, we can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. I took a slow step onto the tarmac. The ground felt solid, real, unlike the pressurized theater of that first-class cabin. "You're talking about fixing a stock price." "Harrison," I said, my voice low but cutting through the storm. "I'm talking about fixing a soul. And those two things don't usually trade on the same exchange." He stepped closer, his expensive loafers splashing in a puddle. I heard about the flight attendant. She's gone. Fired before you even touched down. We've already wiped her from the system. We'll issue a statement. We'll donate to any charity you want. Just, please, get on your laptop and send the stand-down order to your board. If your trucks stop moving our fuel on Monday, we don't have an airline anymore. You know that. I looked at him, and for the first time in 20 years of knowing him, I felt a deep, profound pity. He didn't get it. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought I was holding his company hostage for a better rate or a bigger seat at the table. He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that a man would burn a billion-dollar bridge just because he was denied a glass of water and a shred of respect. You think this is about her, don't you? I asked. I gestured back at the plane. You think Tiffany is the problem, but Tiffany is just the fruit. Harrison, you're the root. That cabin, the one where your staff feels comfortable mocking a man who looks like me, while your preferred guests sit in silence and watch. That's a culture you built. You sold exclusivity so hard that you forgot to include humanity. I pulled my phone out. The screen was a chaotic mess of red numbers. The airline's ticker was bleeding out in real time. It's a strange thing to watch a trillion-dollar industry shudder because of one man's dignity. But that's the power we have now. The power we've earned through the long, dark decades of being told to stay in the back of the bus. We aren't just passengers anymore. We own the road. Marcus, please. Harrison pleaded. He was actually shaking now. Think about the employees. Thousands of people who had nothing to do with that woman's mouth. Their pensions. Their jobs. Don't you dare. I snapped. And for the first time, my voice had the crack of thunder. Don't you dare wrap your failure in the blankets of the working class. I was the working class. My father carried the mail in the Georgia Sun until his back was a question mark. And he never once treated a person with the kind of casual cruelty I just experienced in your first class. You had the chance to train your people. You had the chance to make equity more than a buzzword in your annual report. You chose not to. Now, the bill is due. I started walking toward the black SUV, waiting for me at the edge of the tarmac. I didn't wait for him to follow. I could hear him shouting behind me. Something about renegotiation and unprecedented apologies. But it was just noise. The rain was louder. My heart was louder. I got into the back of the car. The driver, an older man with gray hair and eyes that had seen everything, didn't say a word. He just looked at me in the rearview mirror, gave a single, slow nod, and pulled away. We drove past the hangar, past the shimmering lights of the runway, and out through the security gates. I looked back through the rear window. The plane was a speck in the distance now, surrounded by those black SUVs and the flickering blue lights of airport security. It looked small. Everything that had felt so mountain-sized 2 hours ago now looked like a grain of sand. I leaned my head back against the leather seat and closed my eyes. I was exhausted. Not the kind of exhausted that a nap can fix, but the kind that comes from a lifetime of being on guard. You know what I mean, right? The constant scanning, the constant adjusting of the tie, the sharpening of the accent, the weighing of every word to make sure you don't give them a reason to dismiss you. I had spent 50 years building an empire, so I wouldn't have to feel that way. And yet, there I was, still fighting for water. But as the car moved through the dark streets of the city, that weight started to lift. I had done it. I hadn't just complained, I had acted. I had shown them that the invisible man is actually the one holding the steering wheel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone one last time. I opened the group chat with my senior VPs. Draft the Sterling Protocol. I typed, All future logistics contracts will include a mandatory, non-negotiable dignity audit. Any partner, airline, shipping, or rail that fails a random cultural audit or displays systemic bias loses their Tier 1 status immediately. No appeals. No buybacks. We are no longer just moving cargo. We are moving the standard. I hit send. Then I turned the phone off. You still listening? Brother. Because this is the part I want you to take home with you. People will tell you that the world is just the way it is. They'll tell you that you should be grateful for the seat you have, even if the person serving you is spitting in your face. They'll tell you that business is business, and that feelings don't belong in the boardroom. They're lying. Everything is personal. The way we treat the janitor is just as important as the way we treat the CEO. And if you have the blessing of influence, if you've managed to climb that mountain, you have a debt to pay. You owe it to the kid with the backpack I saw in the aisle. You owe it to the man carrying the mail. You owe it to yourself to say, the price of my partnership is my dignity, and that price is not negotiable. I felt the car slow down as we entered my neighborhood. The trees were tall and dark, their branches heavy with the rain. Everything was quiet. No engines, no intercoms, no sarcastic whispers, just the sound of the world breathing. We pulled into my driveway. The house was glowing, a warm amber light spilling out from the living room windows. My wife was in there. My life was in there. I climbed out of the car. I stood in the driveway for a long minute, letting the last of the rain fall on my face. It felt like a baptism. I wasn't the CEO of Sterling Global in that moment. I wasn't the man who had just wiped out billions. I was just a man who was finally, truly respected, because I had respected myself. I walked to the front door and opened it. The smell of home, cedar, lavender, and the faint scent of the dinner I'd missed hit me like a physical embrace. I dropped my briefcase by the door. That Toomey bag, that armor, didn't feel heavy anymore. It was just a tool. My wife, Sarah, came around the corner. She saw me standing there, soaked to the bone, my suit ruined, my hair a mess. She didn't ask about the contract. She didn't ask about the news alerts that were probably lighting up her phone. She just looked into my eyes and saw the man she'd known since we were 20 years old and broke. You look like you've been in a war, Marcus, she said softly. I think I finally finished one. Baby, I replied. I took her hand and we walked into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, just plain tap water in a mismatched mug. I sat at the table and drank it. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Now, before I go, I want to ask you something. If you've been through it, if you've had to stand your ground when the whole world was trying to push you back, I want you to share that. Drop a comment. Tell me about your 15 minutes. Tell me about the time you decided that your worth was worth more than your paycheck. Let's show the world that we aren't just a market segment. We are a force. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We don't just talk about business here. We talk about truth. We talk about the soul. We talk about what it means to be a man in a world that's still trying to figure out what that looks like. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm a CEO, a husband, a father, and a black man in America. And I'm no longer waiting for permission to belong. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the house settling over me like a warm blanket. I looked at the glass of water sitting on the table, the light reflecting in the clear liquid, and I felt a peace that I hadn't known in decades. The battle wasn't over. The world is a big place, and there are a lot of Tiffany's out there. But for the first time, I knew exactly how to win. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. the sound of the rain outside finally fading into a memory. I was home, and for once, that was more than enough. You stay strong out there. Keep your head up. Keep your armor polished. But never forget the heart beating underneath it. The world is watching. Let's give them something worth seeing. I'll see you in the next one. Peace. The boardroom battle. Listen, men, you probably thought that once I stepped through my front door and took that sip of water, the credits started rolling. You probably thought the happily ever after kicked in and the world just magically fixed itself because a CEO stood his ground. But the world doesn't work like that. The world is like an old, rusted machine, even when you hit the stop button. The gears keep grinding for a while out of pure, stubborn habit. The Monday morning after that flight was the heaviest morning of my life. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., way before the sun even thought about showing its face in Chicago. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at my hands. They were steady, but I felt this hollow ache in my chest. You see, when you challenge a giant like a national airline, you're not just fighting one flight attendant or one bad policy. You're fighting an entire ecosystem if that's just the way it is. I want you to think about a time you had to walk into a room where everyone wanted you to fail. A room where you were the only one who cared about the why, while everyone else only cared about the how much. If you've been there, drop a stay strong in the comments. I need to know you're feeling this with me. By 9:00 a.m., I was standing in front of the glass towers of the airline's corporate headquarters. I wasn't wearing the charcoal suit from the flight. That suit was at the cleaners, getting the smell of jet fuel and disrespect washed out of it. Today, I was in midnight blue, dark, sharp, and cold. I walked through the lobby, and the silence was different than the terminal. Here, it was the silence of lawyers, the silence of people who measure human worth in decimal points. Harrison, the CEO, met me at the elevator. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His tie was slightly crooked, a small detail that told me his world was still tilting. "Marcus," he whispered, grabbing my arm. "The board is in there. They're looking for blood. Not yours. Mine. They think I'm letting a personal matter destroy a decade of logistic stability. You've got to help me navigate this." I pulled my arm away, gently but firmly. "Harrison," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "It was only personal, because your staff made it so. Now, it's just business, and business requires a foundation of trust. You don't build a skyscraper on sand, and you don't build a partnership on prejudice." We walked into the boardroom. It was a long, mahogany table that looked like it cost more than the house I grew up in. There were 12 people sitting there, 10 men and 2 women, all of them looking at me like I was a glitch in their software. They had their folders open. They had their tablets ready. They were ready to manage me. The chairman of the board, an older guy named Whitaker with skin like wrinkled parchment, didn't even stand up. He just gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice like gravel. "Let's skip the pleasantries. We've seen the market reports. We've seen the social media chatter. You've made your point. Now, what is the number? What will it take for you to rescind the termination notice and put our fuel back on your trucks by tonight?" I sat down. I didn't open a folder. I didn't look at a screen. I just leaned forward and rested my elbows on that expensive wood. "You think I'm here to haggle, Mr. Whitaker? I think everyone has a price," he replied, leaning back. "We're prepared to offer Sterling Global a 5% premium on the current contract, a seat on our advisory board, and a formal, private apology from the corporation. That's a lot of money. Marcus. More than enough to buy a lot of water. Some of the other board members chuckled. A dry, cold sound. I felt that heat rising in my neck again. It was the same heat I felt when Tiffany whispered about my luck. But I didn't snap. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Whitaker until the chuckle died in his throat. You see, I said, my voice dropping into that CEO register, the one that makes people stop typing. That's the problem. You think dignity is an expense item. You think you can just write a check and erase the feeling of being told you don't belong in a seat you paid for? But I didn't come here for a 5% raise. I came here to tell you that as of 5:0 p.m. today, Sterling Global Logistics is officially transitioning all regional fuel and cargo support to your primary competitor. The room went ice cold. Harrison gasped. Whitaker's eyes went wide. You can't do that. One of the women blurted out. The litigation alone would take years. You'd be tied up in court until you retire. I have the best lawyers in the country, I said, and for the first time, I let a little bit of the steel show. And they've already found 12 documented instances of service bias and safety negligence from your crew toward minority executives in the last 6 months. We aren't just leaving because of me. We're leaving because you have a systemic failure of leadership. I'm not suing you for money. I'm suing to void the contract based on a breach of the corporate integrity clause. I watched them. I watched the realization sink in. They weren't looking at a difficult passenger anymore. They were looking at the man who was about to ground their fleet. Wait, Harrison said, his voice cracking. Marcus, please. Whitaker, shut up for a second. Marcus, what is the real goal here? You didn't come to this building just to tell us goodbye. You could have done that from your office. I looked at Harrison. He was right. I hadn't come for the money. And I hadn't just come to burn it down. I had come for the Sterling protocol. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No fine print. No legalice. Just 3 bullet points. This is the only way I stay, I said. Whitaker reached for the paper, but I held it down with my hand. First, I said, mandatory, third-party cultural and bias training for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the CEO. And it isn't a one-day seminar. It's a permanent part of your certification process. Second, I continued, an independent dignity hotline, where passengers can report bias directly to a board-level committee that includes representatives from my firm. If a report is verified, the staff member is out. No retraining. No second chances for hatred. And third, I said, looking at Whitaker, you're going to fund a $10 million scholarship program for minority students entering the aviation and logistics industries. And you're going to name it after my father, Silas Sterling. Whitaker looked at the paper, then at me. That's unprecedented. You're asking us to let you run our internal HR. No, I replied. I'm asking you to act like you live in the 21st century. I'm asking you to value the people who keep you in business as much as you value the planes they fly in. The debate lasted 4 hours. There was shouting. There were threats. At one point, Whitaker walked out of the room. But I didn't move. I sat in that chair like I was part of the mahogany. I thought about the kid with the backpack. I thought about my dad's tired eyes. I thought about the 15 minutes of silence in that first-class cabin. Finally, Harrison walked over to Whitaker and whispered something in his ear. They looked at me, then at the paper. Whitaker sat back down. He looked older than he did when I walked in. We'll agree to the points, he said, his voice defeated. But we need a 5-year commitment from Sterling Global. We need to know you aren't going to pull the rug out from under us next month. You have my word. I said. And my word is a lot more solid than your preferred status. I stood up. I didn't shake hands. I didn't need to. The Sterling Protocol was now the law of the land for that airline. As I walked out of that boardroom, I felt a different kind of weight leave my shoulders. It wasn't just my dignity anymore. It was a shield for the next person who walked into that cabin. I reached the lobby and stepped out into the Chicago sun. It was a bright, clear day. The wind was blowing off the lake, cool and fresh. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a week, my heart felt light. I walked toward my car, but then I stopped. There was a young black man working the valet stand. He looked about 20. With a bright, eager face, he was sprinting back and forth, opening doors, smiling, doing his best to stay invisible while being useful. I walked up to him. He looked startled for a second, seeing a man in a midnight blue suit heading his way. "Excuse me, son," I said. "Yes, sir. Can I get your car for you?" "In a minute," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my business card. I handed it to him. "My name is Marcus Sterling. I run a company called Sterling Global Logistics. We're starting a new scholarship program for young men like you who want to get into this business. I want you to call that number tomorrow. Ask for my assistant. Tell her Marcus sent you." The kid looked at the card, then at me. His eyes went wide. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Just remember one thing. You belong in any room you walk into. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." I got into my car and drove away. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the kid still standing there, holding that card like it was made of gold. The boardroom was behind me. The flight was a memory. But the work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just a CEO. I was a builder. I'm Marcus Sterling, and I'm still moving the world. Part 6. The Lesson of the Mail Truck. Extra Chapter 2. You ever have a memory that's so vivid you can still smell it? For me, it's the smell of hot asphalt and old, dusty canvas. It's the smell of a Georgia summer in 1985. I was sitting on my porch last night, watching the fireflies, and that memory came back to me so hard, I felt like I was 12 years old again. Everyone sees the CEO now. They see the Toomey bags and the first-class seats, but they don't see the boy who sat in the passenger seat of a Grumman LLV, the standard U.S. Postal Service mail truck, watching his father navigate a world that didn't want him there. If you've got a memory of a parent or a mentor who taught you how to stand tall when the world wanted you to bow, I want you to share that in the comments. Let's honor the people who built our foundations. My father, Silas Sterling, was a man of few words and a lot of action. He carried a mail route in a wealthy neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta. It was a place with sprawling lawns and white columns, the kind of place where people like us were usually only seen through the service entrance. I remember one Saturday. He let me ride along with him. I was so proud. I thought my dad was a king. He had that crisp blue uniform, the pith helmet, and he knew every house, every dog, every name on every envelope. He moved with a rhythm, a precision that I try to emulate in my boardrooms today. We pulled up to this massive estate at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was a house that looked like a museum. My dad hopped out with a package, a heavy box that required a signature. I watched from the window of the truck. A woman came to the door. She was dressed in white, holding a glass of iced tea. Even from the truck, I could see the way she looked at my father. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of inconvenience. My dad politely explained that he needed a signature for the delivery. The woman didn't reach for the pen. Instead, she pointed to the ground at my father's feet. She wanted him to put the package on the dirt, not hand it to her. "I can't do that, ma'am," I heard my father say, his voice calm and steady. "It's a certified delivery. I need to witness the signature." She scoffed, the same sound the woman in 3B made on my flight 30 years later. She said something I couldn't quite hear, but I saw my father's back stiffen. He didn't move. He didn't drop the box. He just stood there, holding it out, his posture as straight as a soldier's. She finally snatched the pen, scribbled something on the pad, and slammed the door. My father walked back to the truck. He didn't look angry. He didn't look defeated. He just climbed back into the driver's seat, adjusted his hat, and pulled the lever to put the truck in gear. "Dad?" I asked, my voice trembling. Why was she so mean? He didn't answer right away. He drove to the end of the street, pulled over under a big oak tree, and turned off the engine. He looked at me, and I saw a look in his eyes that I'll never forget. It was a mixture of love and a warning. "Marcus," he said, "listen to me. People like that, they think they're superior because of what they have and where they live. They try to make you feel small so they can feel big. But here's the secret. Dignity is the only thing in this world that no one can take from you. They can refuse to look at you. They can refuse to speak to you. They can even try to trample you. But as long as you know who you are, they can't touch your soul." He tapped the badge on his chest. "I'm a representative of the United States government," he said. "I'm an honest man doing an honest day's work. If she wants to live in a house full of hate, that's her prison, not mine. I'm free to walk away. She's stuck with herself." He restarted the truck. "Don't ever let someone else's smallness make you small. Marcus, you shine so bright they have to squint to look at you. You understand?" "Yes, sir," I whispered. I didn't realize it then, but that was the day the CEO was born. That was the day I realized that my armor wasn't going to be a uniform or a suit, but my own sense of self-worth. Fast forward to last week, when Tiffany was mocking me, when she was refusing me that glass of water. I wasn't just Marcus, the CEO. I was that boy in the mail truck. I could feel Silas Sterling sitting in the seat next to me. I could hear his voice saying, "Don't let her smallness make you small." That's why I didn't scream. That's why I didn't make a scene. Because I knew that by losing my cool, I'd be giving her exactly what she wanted. I'd be confirming her bias. But by staying calm, by staying precise, I was holding up a mirror to her own ugliness. And that mirror is what eventually broke her world. After the boardroom meeting with Harrison and Whitaker, I took a detour on my way home. I drove out to a quiet cemetery on the south side of town. I walked through the grass until I found a simple headstone that read, "Silas Sterling, a faithful servant." I sat down on the grass. I didn't have any flowers. I just had that crystal glass of water I'd taken from the plane. Well, the memory of it. Anyway, I did it. "Dad," I whispered. I shone so bright they had to squint. I told him about the scholarship. I told him about the Sterling Protocol. I told him that his name was going to be on a building where kids who look like us would learn how to fly. I felt a breeze move through the trees. A soft, warm Georgia-style breeze, even song I was in Illinois. And for a second, I could swear I smelled old canvas and hot asphalt. I realized then that my father's life wasn't just a story about carrying the mail. It was a logistics operation of the heart. He moved lessons from one generation to the next. He delivered integrity to a son who would one day need it to move billions. We're all delivering something. Man, every time we walk into a room, Every time we handle a conflict, every time we decide how to treat someone who's being difficult, we're leaving a trail. I want you to think about what you're delivering today. Is it hope? Is it strength? Or is it just more of the same noise? As I drove back to my house, I saw a USPS truck driving down my street. I slowed down and gave the driver a wave. He waved back, a simple, everyday gesture between two men. But to me, it was a salute. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm the son of a postman. I'm the CEO of a global empire. But most importantly, I'm a man who knows that the most important cargo you'll ever carry is your own pride. The lights of my house were waiting for me. Sarah was waiting. My life was waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to check my watch or straighten my tie. I was just Marcus, and Marcus was enough. Stay focused, stay dignified, and never, ever let them see you blink. I'll see you at the top. Peace.